Okay, we are in. This is total Pesach Passover material that we're doing here. We are talking about um, the Jews leaving Egypt after 430 years. Now, why do they say 430? We say 430 because they count it from the time of the Bris HaBesarim. What's the Bris HaBesarim? The covenant of the divided parts. What happened? Abraham doubted, whatever that means. He had full belief in God, but he had a doubt that the Jews were going to be able to withstand that the exile, because they wouldn't have a way to purify themselves from their mistakes, and they would be lost forever. He could hold on. He's Abraham. Maybe his sons could hold on. Maybe his grandsons, but subsequent generations, he didn't know how the Jews were going to make it. And God says, "Here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to send the Jews down into Egypt, because when they go down into Egypt, they're going to learn how to live in exile. That's going to become part of their spiritual DNA. Sometimes in life, you got to go to Egypt. You don't want to go, but it's going to be the best thing for you, because you're going to get tough, and then that toughness and that survival instinct, you're going to magnify, and you're going to acquire it, and then you're going to be able to take it in other parts of your life. So look back. The Almighty was guiding you when you were a kid, when you were a teenager, when you were someone in your 20s. Was there like a defining moment where you said, I passed this test, I can pass any test? Think about that, because that's what happened with the Jews. And we said in last week's Parsha, they left, they took the Korban, they took the Passover sacrifice. The sheep, I don't know exactly how their religion worked, because the sun was the ultimate symbol of power, but the sheep was a god of sorts. I guess kind of like the white cows in India. And we took that symbol and we slaughtered it. Sheep had some kind of power over them, and we slaughtered it in front of them. And we took the blood and we put it on our thresholds, because we're going to walk out through those thresholds. We're going to walk out having slaughtered the god of Egypt, and like Charlie says, if you're going to make a transformation in life, you got to be all in. If you got a business deal, you got to be all in to make it. If you're going to rip yourself out of the East Coast and plant yourself into the West Coast, right? You got to be all in. So the Jews had to be all in. They had to slaughter the god, put the blood in their house, and then be defiant and walk through it out into the world, and they left their homes behind. That's what it took, and we have that now in our bodies. We have that, and we give it to our subsequent generations. This leaving of Egypt. Egypt is also, the word in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. It's Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means a narrow, confined place. When you leave Egypt, you're leaving a narrow, defined place in your life. There's times when you're constricted, and Passover is the opportunity. Really, the night of Passover is the opportunity to leave something behind that is holding you back, that's constricting your life. The power is in the air, and people use it. They write forget it. Well, we can talk about it later. I'm not going to go into all the details. But there's a power in the air, and that's going to be the 19th of April, Friday night. It will be Passover this year. Of course, 5 days before that, on the 14th, will be the Eish Torah banquet. Okay, now, so the Jews leave, and they can't go the way of the Philistines. Philistines, Palestine, Palestinians, they've always been our nemesis through history, and we can't go that way because remember, this generation has slave mentality. They don't think of themselves as free people. They're going to do their best, but at the end of the day, they're going to all die out other than 2 are ever going to see the land of Israel. The women will, but the men will not. They just never outgrew being slaves in Egypt. And we cannot operate that way. We can't operate. We have to be able to take responsibility, take control. There was something that they couldn't burn out of themselves when they did leave. Their children, who grew up more freer in the desert, were more fitting to come into the land of Israel. But they had what it took to leave Egypt. They just didn't have what it took to go into the land of Israel. Because, remember, they're going into the desert. And the desert, they're going to be under the guidance of God for 40 years. So they kind of, can be under that very strong influence and servitude to God. But when you go into the land of Israel, you gotta farm. You gotta be in trade and business. You're not living under Daddy's home anymore. And that generation didn't have what it took to make that complete transition. Which is even Moses doesn't go into the land of Israel. He was not the leader they needed. We needed Joshua. He wasn't as great as Moses, and that shows you in life. Sometimes the greatest people are not the people that are going to lead you to where you need to go. It could be a different kind of a leader, right? George Washington today, I don't know if he could lead the United States. He was good at the time, but he wasn't. Different times call for different people. So when the Jews left, they brought the bones up of Joseph. In fact, they brought up the bones of all the tribes, all the leaders of the tribes, all the sons, the 12 sons, all their skeletons were brought to be buried into the land of Israel. The whole Talmud about all that. And now here's the plan. The plan was they were going to bait the Egyptians. God's plan was we're going to bait the Egyptians into the Red Sea. So the Jews went up against the Red Sea after 7 days. They arrived at the shores of the Red Sea. The Egyptians who had let them leave, Pharaoh realizes he made a mistake and he goes after them. And the Jews only have one place to go, which is the Red Sea. They gotta go through it. It's the only place to go. It's impossible, and that's life. Life sometimes it's like holy cannoli. I gotta go right into the gauntlet of whatever that thing is. That's impossible, but I gotta take the first steps, and that's life. Life is sometimes you have to barrel ahead into something with your faith that you can do it with, and knowing that God, there's no other way to go. I got to go straight. God, you better be with me. Here we go. And you look back in life and you made it. He split the sea for you. There's 3 areas he splits the sea. That we say when he makes your wife, you find a wife. That is as hard for God to match you up with the right woman. It's hard. That's how as hard it is to split the Red Sea. We also say in the words of finding a parnasa and making an income. As hard it is for us to make incomes, that it was as hard as for God to split the Red Sea. And there's a third area, which is I'm trying to think what that is. Let's see if it comes to me. But there's effort. There's effort in life that we have to do, so it could be either coming to living in the land of Israel, or it could be learning Torah. I'm not quite sure. All right, if I find it in my notes, I will tell you about that third thing. Something else is very interesting. Do you know what percentage of the Jews were left behind in the land of Egypt? Anyone want to venture? What percentage?
80%.
How did you know that?
I just remember.
That's awesome. Yes, that's the scariest statistic out there concerning us today's Jewish people. Only 80% of all Jews never left Egypt. 20% left. 20% of the adults left. all the children left. So what happened? Every family, 20% of the family, had to adopt 80% of the children. So, so every family got left with their set of children and 4 sets of children from other families, and that was one of the unbelievable things that the Jewish people did, because you had a lot of orphans, and the Jewish people left with the children of the people. And who were left behind? It was the people who didn't believe this thing was going to happen. Look, they were under severe slavery for 210 years. Okay, so they.
But why did they let their children go?
No, the children didn't die.
I'm saying, but
They
why
died.
did they let their children? Why did they let their children go if they were unwilling to go?
Well, they were dead.
So they weren't dead prior.
They died in the plague of darkness. They died in the plague of darkness. Why was it the plague of darkness? One reason was the Jews could see in the plague of darkness. The Egyptians couldn't. The Jews that didn't believe in that Moses was the Messiah and the Jews who were going to leave him died at that time, and the Jews buried them. But we didn't. It would have been a complete a desecration of God's name. So therefore, we did it in darkness.
So are we saying that these 80% that were left behind were dead by the time we left them behind? Is that the story?
Yeah. When we left Egypt on the night of the 15th of Nisan, the night of the Seder, they were dead. Yes, they were dead. And that was, and so what do we say now? And it's brought up now. This is like, we're going to leave America. One day we're leaving America. Everybody in the traditional Jewish world, everybody believes that, and people are worried. We don't know how history is going to, work itself out. People are worried that 80% are going to be left behind, and so guys like me, I lose sleep over that possibility. I want to bring everybody with us, so we're out there saying, be aware that there is going to be a time in history when we are going to leave the United States and move to Israel. I don't know how it's going to happen. People are doing it now. I'm not a prophet. I just know these are traditions, and you want to be part of that 20%. Now, it doesn't have to be 80% are left behind. The Jews could transform themselves, which they are in part, and we all go. But there is that fear that if whatever happens in the Torah can repeat itself down the line in history. So that's one thing we like to. It's something that's discussed in depth. Now the Jews. Now I want to tell you something. The Jews never crossed the Red Sea. The Jews went into the Red Sea. In fact, they went in through. Each tribe had its own channel through the Red Sea, but they only did a half circle, and they came back on the same shore that they left on. They baited the Egyptians into the Red Sea. The Egyptians got caught in the quagmire of the Red Sea. The Jews walked on hard ground. The Egyptians walked basically into quicksand, and they got stuck. And the waters came, the Jews got out, the waters came back. You guys go, that is the most crazy, unbelievable. Do you really believe that, Rabbi? The answer is yes, I do. But we once again, you have to come to my Passover table. We don't end the Seder till about 2:00 in the morning, but we do discuss this idea in great depth. By the way, the whole world knew the Red Sea split because every body of water at that time split into two. Lake Michigan, the tea, your Starbucks Frappuccino, everything split. The world knew that the Red Sea split. What can I tell you? The Jews go on into the desert, and there they realize they have no food. They have no food. And God says, okay, I'm going to give you manna from heaven. Everybody knows manna from heaven, famous phrase. and you are still getting manna from heaven today. It's called, you go out there and you bust your chops to make a living. But we say, don't believe it's just you're doing what you have to do. The Jews did what they had to do to get manna. So for some people, it was at their doorstep. For other people, they had to go out, a half mile and go find it themselves. You could only eat enough per day. You could never keep anything over. And on Shabbos, you got 2 portions of it because you don't go out and get manna on Shabbos. You get the day of rest. That's why we have 2 challahs on Friday night and 2 challahs on Saturday day. Represents the 2 that we got a double portion of manna on before Shabbos. And you are getting manna till this day. You go out there and you sell and you do things for people and you get a paycheck. That paycheck is coming from heaven, and just like the manna comes from heaven. It's a big discussion in Judaism. How much effort do I have to put in to make my fortune? Big discussion. Not our discussion right now. Maybe we'll get Shlomo to talk about it one night. Last thing I want to talk about is the Jews are entered on the way to. There's something that always happens on our way to the land of Israel. We meet Amalek. We meet our arch enemy. What's the definition of Amalek? The Amalek is the person who will kill himself to kill Jews. Hitler killed Germany to kill the Jews. Suicide bombers will kill themselves to kill Jews. Anybody who will kill themselves to kill Jews is Amalek. He's our arch enemy.
Please spell that.
Amalek.
Thank you. 3 times the Jews entered the land of Israel. 3 times the Jews entered the land of Israel is the last thing we're going to talk about. Now they're leaving Egypt. On their way after the first temple was destroyed, they headed back and they met Amalek. His name was Haman. And the 3rd time we were going back to the land of Israel was in the 1880s, the Aliyah movement, 1880s, 1920s. We met Amalek on the way to Israel. His name is Hitler. Every time the Jews have a mass movement to the land of Israel, Amalek appears to stop us. So in this week's Parsha, this is the first time we meet Amalek, and we go to war with Amalek. And the way we beat Amalek, and this is very important, is Joshua would hold his hand. Moses would be on the mountaintop. They looked at him. His hands were outstretched to heaven, and that's when the Jews were strong in the battle. And when Moses put his hands down, the Jews the Jews were beaten back. And finally, they held up Moses' hands, and Joshua broke through Amalek. And Amalek likes to go after the weak. That's where he first starts. He goes after the weak, i.e., suicide bombings in religious places and nightclubs. That's how he works. That's how Amalek, women and children in ghettos. That's how Amalek works. It doesn't take on the might of things. And the way we beat Amalek is with Moses' hands up. We beat him with faith. We beat him with mitzvahs. We beat him with prayer. That's how we beat Amalek. It's hard. You can't beat Amalek through just guns and bullets. That's not the Jewish. That's just not how we're set up, because he's the anti-Jewish force in the world. That's Amalek. So I think we've raised a lot of topics. We can't answer them all, but I want to that's what this parsha is about. Next week's parsha is the doozy of doozies. It's the giving of the Torah. And we'll talk about that next week. I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.